Hello and welcome to the Spinal Cord Injury Forum. My name is Jeannie Hoffman. I'm a rehab psychologist here at the University of Washington and the psychosocial co-director of the Northwest Regional Spinal Cord Injury System at the University of Washington. The forums, the video recordings, and all of our online media content are made possible from a grant by the National Institute on Disability, Independent Living, and Rehabilitation Research. Tonight we are really lucky to have two great therapists who work at Harborview Medical Center in the Rehab Med Department, Elisa Smith and Holly Wakefield, and their presentation tonight is on customizing your ride, and I will turn it over to them. Please join me in welcoming our speakers.
So thanks for the introduction, Jeannie. I'm a physical therapist on inpatient rehab, and I've been working at Harborview Medical Center for about 11 years. And almost everything that I learned about manual wheelchairs happened at Harborview, from learning from people with spinal cord injuries and other therapists, going to conferences, looking at research. And I think that's a common experience because usually physical therapy school and occupational therapy school doesn't have a lot of information on how to set up a manual wheelchair. And so we wanted to pass on some of what we've learned today and open up on an ongoing discussion between everybody who's involved in this niche of therapy.
So I'm Holly Wakefield. I've been working at Harborview Medical Center for about 7 years, also on the inpatient rehab unit. I'm just going to go over our objectives. So by the time you leave here tonight, you'll be able to name at least 4 ultralight wheelchair parts, describe 3 hand frame options, and describe how to safely modify the wheels for cold winter climates. This is how we're going to tackle tonight. We're going to break the wheelchair down into the individual parts, and we're going to talk about each part in isolation. So we'll talk about the frame, the wheels, the backrest, the seat cushion, and the footplate. And then we're going to pull it all together and talk about how those parts are interrelated and how they work together through a couple scenarios.
So when we're throwing out the term ultralight wheelchairs, I Googled it. It's not that common of a word, even though we throw it around a lot on inpatient rehab. So the idea behind an ultralight wheelchair is that it's a manual wheelchair. It doesn't include anything to do with power wheelchairs. And it is a custom manual wheelchair. It's complex, and so it tends to be more expensive. Some of the 3 main distinguishing features of an ultralight wheelchair would be, one, that it's lightweight. However, that's a bit of a misnomer. It depends on the materials that you pick, the components, and even the size of the wheelchair that's being ordered. It could be 18 pounds up to 50 pounds. So sometimes it actually weighs more than a lighter weight option because of those selections. Secondly, the ultralight wheelchair tends to be durable, partially because of the design, but also because of the materials used. So products used in the bike market and the wheelchair market sometimes cross over between using aluminum, titanium, carbon fiber, and these sorts of wheelchairs. And then lastly, they're designed to be adjustable, so they have more options as far as where the wheels are mounted so that it's easier to reach them, how much the seat sloped so that it's easier to push the wheelchair and have more upright posture. They're just a lot more customizable than cheaper options. Having said that, though, the most expensive and customizable wheelchairs don't come ready-made. It takes a relationship between a wheelchair therapist or a seating therapist and the user and a wheelchair rep, and having availability of products to order the right chair in the first place and to be able to modify and make it actually work for the user. And that takes an ability to communicate and figure out what the end goals are. As far as the first part of our presentation, when we're going into the frame on an ultralight wheelchair is the base of it, and in this picture you can see it's mostly the blue tubing with a little bit of green hardware. So it doesn't include things like the backrest, the wheels, the armrests. There's a lot of accessories or parts you can put onto the frame, but when we're talking about frame, it's just that lower part of the chair.
So all ultralight wheelchairs are going to fall into one of 2 categories. They're either going to have a folding frame or a rigid or fixed frame. I think it's easiest to understand the difference between the 2 if I show you how they collapse to store. So the folding frame is going to collapse in half. So the frame itself bends in on itself. The rigid frame is all welded together. So the frame itself is not going to collapse, but if it turns sideways, the backrest is going to fold down, and then you can pull some of the parts off for storage. So they both have pros and cons to them. If you're someone who's using your feet to propel at all, then the folding frame is really nice because it gets the frame out of the way and allows you to use your feet in any direction to pull. The rigid frame, though, is more customizable, more adjustable, and so it allows you to mount the wheels in different places. It allows you to have a little bit more positioning support. And so if you're someone who's using your arms to propel the chair, even if you're walking part of the time, probably the rigid frame is a better option. One of the differences between the frames styles would be that the folding frame has a little bit of flex in it. And what I mean is that it's not as rigid of a ride. So it would be like Lance Armstrong wouldn't ride a mountain bike in the Tour de France because it wouldn't be energy efficient, and so that's sort of similar to the folding frame.
Within the category of rigid frames, which is the main focus tonight, these chairs are called rigid frames or fixed frames. There are a variety of styles or designs, as well as several products, which we're not going into the specific products tonight. But with the designs of rigid frames, the first option that we don't have up here is the box frame. If you're looking at it from the side, it does look like a rectangle or a box. This has a lot of value to it, but there are not as many product options in this category. So a lot of the times that we're ordering wheelchairs for people with spinal cord injury, they fit more into the categories of the cantilever or the modified box frame. The modified box frame has that extra tubing on the bottom, so it looks more like a wedge or a triangle when you're looking at it from the side. And then the cantilever has more of a single tube. It doesn't have that base tube on it. I think around when I was starting at Harborview, it seemed like we were having a big push to switch to cantilever frames with the idea that a single tube made it more streamlined and easier to load in the car. However, the hardware on the back of it, where the back wheel attaches, still hangs down pretty far, and it actually can be harder to load because the tubing is sometimes thicker in the wall and wider. So some of these chairs actually weigh more than the modified box frames depending on the brand and the material used. So it's not necessarily more streamlined, and it's not necessarily lighter than the alternatives. And I have had the experience where some users have gone from a modified frame to a cantilever frame and found that there's a little bit of wiggle or play in that compared to the frame that has that extra rigidity with the lower tube. So they're both good options. There's some pros and cons with each. Oh, I'll start. Okay, sorry. So within the frame dimensions, again, it's not just about which of the styles of chairs that you pick, but how you order it, what dimensions you select, what angles you select, and once it comes, if it's adjustable, is it adjusted to the needs of the user and the posture of the user. So we don't have time to go into every single aspect of the dimensions and angles. That could take a whole day. But we're just going to introduce a few of the aspects of the chair that are especially influential. Starting with the height from the back of the seat to the floor, which is also called the rear seat to floor height. And this is a big deal in terms of being able to easily reach the wheels to push the wheelchair. Typically, we see people sitting up too high above the wheels. They're riding a little bit too high. It makes it harder to push the wheelchair on a flat surface quickly, and it also makes it harder to do wheelies, so lifting up the front wheel to go on uneven terrain when you're sitting so high above the wheels. A quick diagnostic, if any of you want to try it right now, to see if you're hitting about the right part of the wheel when you're sitting still, would be first make sure that you're sitting upright with good posture, because if you have more of a slouched posture, it will drop your hands closer to the floor, and it'll feel like the wheels are easier to reach than they are when you're sitting upright. And then with your hands hanging down to the side, the goal is that the tip of your middle finger or even the palm of your hand rests at the center of your back wheel on the axle. If it doesn't, if your hand's a lot higher, several things can contribute to that. One could be that the chair that was ordered in the first place. Some chairs have a lower limit, and sometimes that could be 17 inches, 16 inches, 15 inches. It depends on the brand that was ordered. So that's something to discuss when you're picking different frame options. Secondly, there could be adjustability in the back of the chair that allows somebody to lower the back of the chair towards the floor, and maybe just nobody's adjusted that yet. So that's possibly something to be fixed if you already have your own chair and you're wanting that to be looked at. The third thing would be the cushion thickness. Cushions can be anywhere from 2 to 4.5 inches thick, and the thicker the cushion, the more it lifts you up in the back of the chair. The back wheels come in a variety of diameters, and also tires come with a variety of thicknesses, and that too can lift you up in the back. And Even the frame seat, so the seat sling that goes underneath the cushion can be stretched out fabric that really bows down and allows you to sink below the wheels. And if that gets replaced with a solid seat pan that's more rigid and lifts the cushion up, that can lift you up above the wheels. So that's not to say you shouldn't choose any of these components, but that will influence how easily you can reach the wheels. There's also the front seat to floor height. Each company and each product varies on how specific that how specifically they define where on the chair this measurement's taken. It's not necessarily right in front of where your cushion sits, but that's typically where it's measured. And this height relates to your lower leg length, and it also relates to how much space you need under the front of the footplate. So you want the front of the seat to be high enough to support your lower legs, but to allow you to go on uneven terrain without the footrest catching on things on the ground. And the distance that you need for this also relates to the thickness of your cushion, because that will lift your body up higher or lower above the footrest. And oftentimes having an upper limit for this measurement, typically we would recommend not going a lot higher than 19.5 inches, because that can raise your knees up so high that it's hard for you to fit underneath desks and tables. And then these two things combined, as you can see, almost always the front and the back of the seat have different heights, and so the seat is therefore sloped. This matters as far as posture goes. Dr. Hastings came a couple of years back and talked about how she did research with people who have paralyzed trunks or paralyzed torsos, and found that they needed low back support from the backrest at the proper angle and height, combined with a certain amount of seat slope to prop somebody into more of an upright posture. And she found that, roughly speaking, around 14 degrees helps with that. There's certainly individual differences in needs as far as that goes, but that's a rough target that we're shooting for. That's related to the difference in the front and the back of the seat. But unfortunately, it takes a little bit of trigonometry to figure it out, because it also relates to the seat depth and where all these measurements are taken on the chair. So sometimes you can work with a wheelchair rep and therapist to figure that out for you, so that you have the right posture when you get the new chair and see that new seat slope.
And then there's also some wheelchair companies will allow you to add extra length to the frame in front of the seat cushion. This can be helpful because it spreads out the front and the rear wheels, which gives you a longer lever arm, and it makes it easier when you're going on uneven terrain outside to get over some small obstacles. It also can be nice to give you a handhold for some complex transfers, like on and off of bathroom equipment or in and out of the car. So we're tending to order 1 to 2 inches of extra frame length when we get the opportunity. The reason it's helpful for transfers is because it gives a flat surface to hold on to instead of holding onto the frame as it's bending and your hands kind of slipping down. And the last measurement we're going to talk about here is the front end taper. And so that's the difference in width between the seat and then the frame down near your feet. Having a large amount of taper, so having it narrower down near your feet, is helpful to kind of get into smaller spaces. It's less prohibitive. However, if you go too narrow, some people don't like their legs together. I recently had a patient who said, guys aren't meant to sit like that. They're meant to have their legs apart. Whether it's a guy or a girl, sometimes it's personal preference. You just want your legs how you want them. And also, if you make it too narrow, sometimes your legs will rest on the frame, and then you want to just make sure that you don't have a pressure point for skin. And finally, if you're someone who does some walking and some wheelchair propulsion and you need braces on your lower legs, you want to make sure that you don't make the frame so narrow that the braces don't fit. So we're going to switch gears from the frame over to the rear wheel. And so as we get started, I just want to kind of define some of the parts of the rear wheel, because there's a lot that goes into it. So not only are you picking the tire, but you're also picking a hand rim. And then what we would actually classify as the wheel would be the spokes, the wheel rim, and the hub. It's kind of hard to see the wheel rim here, so this picture is taken from the side looking towards the chair. I'm going to flip the tire around so you can look from the inside out. So that moves the hand rim out of the way, and now you can see that black circle would be the wheel rim.
Okay, so when you're picking the back wheels or the rear wheels, one of the decisions to make is how tall or what diameter of wheel would best suit your needs. Similar to almost everything that we're talking about, you do have to have a chance to just try it out and go on uneven terrain and see what works with your strength and your performance needs and your body type. But research has shown that wider wheels or those taller wheels can make propulsion easier. It can make it less tiring to wheel faster and use less energy. And it also tends to get caught in uneven terrain less than a shorter wheel. Having said that, a 24-inch wheel, which is a little bit shorter than common bike wheels, is the standard for most wheelchairs that you will see out and about. But even though 24 inches is the main option available, you can get taller ones. A 25-inch rear wheel actually is more comparable to a common bike wheel. And it gets confusing because for some reason wheelchair wheels and bike wheels tend to be listed with different inches. So I guess what I'm saying is a 25-inch rear wheel taken into a bike shop would measure in often as 26 in a bike store. So if you want something comparable, you might want to switch gears and talk about it in the metric system and instead talk about a 559-inch or 559 millimeter tall wheel. And that will give you more options for components and repairs at a bike shop. So once you pick the diameter, you will also need to pick the type of tire. And tires vary as far as how high the pressure levels are, so how much they can be inflated. They vary in how thick they are, and they also vary in the tread. And you can get really technical and use a lot of the same principles and even the same products that are common in the bike industry as you look into this further. But a standard wheelchair wheel tends to be kind of middle in the road, 60 or 70 psi for the pressure level, and little to no treads common. Higher pressure options would be more 80 to 140. Those tend to have less tread, to be thinner, and then there are more like mountain bike type tires that are 40 to 60 psi, thicker, knobbier. So for most people, they tend to go with a little bit of tread or no tread, and often find that the higher pressure option is easier to use on indoor surfaces, sidewalks, roads. And so for everyday use, that's the most common. That's what we often order as people's first set of wheels. If you're doing things outdoors on an uneven terrain and you want to have a second pair of wheels, that's definitely an option, but it does influence a lot of things with the setup of the wheelchair. First of all, if you're switching between wheels that are the same diameter but the thickness of the tire differs, that's going to raise or lower the back of the seat of the chair like I talked about before. That can then change the slope of the seat. It can change the mounting of the front wheels or the casters so that they don't ride and wear as smoothly. And the width of the wheels often varies, and so you may need to have extra parts to make sure the spacing works out as you swap between the tires. And even the brakes on the chair don't necessarily line up because of the differences in the thickness of the wheels. So you'll want to inflate them to a sweet spot. If they're under or over inflated based on the type of tire you pick, as well as the terrain you're going on, and even your body weight, it's easier to get flats. And so it's important to have a spare pair of inner tubes and a hand pump and a patch kit. This is Holly's car. Last week she drove over a bolt and got a flat tire as we were working on this presentation. And sometimes with wheelchair wheels, they're going to have flats. It's a lot easier to have a spare pair of inner tubes with you and the supplies to get them repaired quickly as opposed to being stranded. And it's not a very expensive investment to have this with you at all times so that you're ready for flats. With wheels, the standard option for wheelchair wheels is usually a free option. It's metal, it's heavier, it's not as durable, and it's not as comfortable of a ride. So we've had a lot of people come back and tell us that one of the most important upgrades to them, whether they were paying for it themselves or trying to get insurance to pay for it, has been getting a more expensive type of wheel. There are several different brands available, but they often are lighter, more durable. The materials that they use, whether it's carbon fiber or nylon, tends to be lighter. Because of the difference in the materials and design, often they can get away with fewer spokes, which makes it easier to grab the hub and reach the center of the back wheel to pop the wheel on and off during car transfers.
And then the last part of the wheel that we're going to talk about would be the hand rim. And so a standard hand rim is going to be the one on the bottom left here. So it's just a uncoated metal, it's circular, it's kind of small. There are going to be two options for upgrading. You can either add some coating to the rim, or you can change the shape. So when you add coating, there's a couple options. You can have the rim fully coated, or it can be partially coated. So the one in the middle is an example of a partially coated rim. The one on the right would be fully coated. For someone who doesn't have the ability to grip the rim, if you use a solid metal rim, they're not going to get enough traction to be able to effectively propel the chair. And so for someone who can't grip the rim, I go towards the fully coated push rim. Oftentimes the partial coating is not enough. The options for a fully coated push rim would be neoprene or vinyl. The vinyl tends to tear, and it also doesn't perform very well when wet, so it gets very slippery, so just know that going into it. For someone who has grip strength but tends to get tired while propelling, having that rubber strip or the partially coated can make it less fatiguing to propel a wheelchair. And then when it comes to the hand rim shapes, your options are again that circular tube or having an oval shape. The oval shape is going to be more ergonomic, and so it's going to keep your wrist in a more neutral position. When you have the circular one, people tend to pull in a little bit, which places some stress on the nerves in your wrist. People who are propelling wheelchairs full-time are really prone to getting carpal tunnel, and so that would cause some pain and tingling into your hands, and so having a more ergonomic push rim can help prevent that. When you're trying out push rims, or before you pick your push rims, it's important to try them out, and it's important to not just try them out pushing across a room like this with a flat, firm surface. You want to really test them out. So you want to make sure that you try going fast, going slow, turning, stopping. Make sure that it's performing how you want, you're not getting super tired. You also want to make sure that you are try pushing it up a hill, try pushing it down a hill. You want to make sure that you're getting enough traction when you're going up a hill. If you're not getting enough traction with a standard push rim, consider having some coating on it. The coating when you go down a hill, though, can tend to burn your hands. So that's why you really want to test it out and make sure that you've got either wear some gloves to make sure that your skin is protected, or maybe pick a different coating to try and protect your hands while going down a hill. The other condition you want to try is try it when the push rims are dry and when they're wet. So I mentioned before that the vinyl ones tend to get really slick when wet. Also, the uncoated metal ones tend to get slick while wet. So in Seattle, it's pretty easy to try out rims when it's wet outside, but it's not always the most fun. So a nicer time to try it out would be take your wheelchair out when you're trying it first thing in the morning in the grass, and let the dew get on there and just see if you still get enough traction or if your hands are slipping. Some people will also say to just pour a cup of water over the rims and try them out and see how that works. And you want to make sure that you're checking both for performance, but also check for pain, discomfort, and how much effort it takes to push the rim when you're trying them out.
Okay, so that's the back wheels. The front wheels, which are called casters, or the smaller wheels, we will just briefly touch on them. They do have different brands and mounting systems and styles, but the 2 points that we wanted to talk about were just the tire width, or the width of the caster, as well as the diameter of the caster. And the standard free option is poly. It's thin and it's hard, and it tends to get caught in things like potholes or grates, and it also doesn't roll very smoothly on uneven ground. So usually, if possible, it's good to try to get a soft roll, wider, thicker tire to help with uneven terrain and to make the ride more comfortable and smooth. In terms of the height or the diameter of the front caster, they range anywhere from 3 to 6 inches in diameter usually. Often we're ordering around 4 or 5 inch tall casters so that they can perform on hard, smooth surfaces and some uneven surfaces. But ultimately, learning how to do wheelies, so being able to lift the front wheels up and over uneven terrain, keeps the casters from getting caught on a lot more than just picking a certain number of inches for the diameter. So meeting with a therapist who can have you practice tipping back and going on uneven terrain safely until you feel comfortable doing it on your own will give you more freedom with uneven terrain.
With the backrest, you need to know that picking a backrest is like picking a pair of jeans, okay? Not everybody's body is the same, and so if you don't pay attention to the curves, it's not going to fit right. So at the very least, you need to make sure that before you order a backrest, you have held it up to you and made sure that your body, it fits your curves. Ideally, try it out for a day or two. So some people are shaped with wider, broader shoulders and a narrow waist. Some people are more pear-shaped. So with that, you can't just measure the person's torso in one spot and measure the backrest in one spot and expect that it'll fit. So you have to make sure you hold it up. With backrest, when I'm ordering one for a new user, I used to think that I needed to order a really tall one and really recline it out, because otherwise they would feel really unstable, and I wanted to make sure that they felt like they could balance. So the purpose of the backrest is really to provide the balance support you need and also to make the chair comfortable. You want to lean against it. What I've since learned is when I was reclining the backrest a lot and getting a really tall one, I was actually making it harder for people because I might have made their torso feel more stable, but I was making the entire wheelchair feel less stable because I was bringing their body weight behind the wheels and making it pop into a wheelie when they weren't intending to. Also, with the taller backrest, it doesn't necessarily fit the normal spine curves. So our spines aren't flat. They're not a board. They have some nice curvature to them. You've probably heard the term lumbar support because our back at the low back curves in. And so sometimes people like some lumbar support in their chairs. So with the backrest, I'm tending to order sort of the shortest ones on the market, so 10 to 12 inches tall, and mount them low and fairly upright to sort of support just that lumbar area. So that's my starting point with backrests. You also want to make sure with backrests that you try out the material. Make sure that it breathes well, that if you're in a hot climate, that it's not holding sweat against you. Some of the backrest material feels really cushy at first, but it breaks down really quickly. And so before you order a backrest, you may want to network and talk to some other wheelchair users and see which fabric is holding up or which material is holding up better than others.
Okay, so for the topic of cushions, I now have to use the pointer. So with cushions, I actually kind of dread when people say, what's the best cushion or what's the right cushion for me or for my patient, because the disappointing answer is always, it depends. There are so many different aspects to picking a cushion and so many different cushions available that I try to narrow it down to just a top 10 list of features to consider on the cushion to have this conversation and start cushion trials. So similar to backrest, it doesn't matter if the cushion is excellent for posture or excellent for skin protection or anything else. If it's not comfortable, it could be very expensive and a great new invention, and if it feels too hard or too soft or unstable, somebody's not going to use it. So I think that is an important starting point. Second, cushion, the surface of a cushion varies, the materials vary, and the support under the hips and under the sit bones depends on the brand and the cushion line. For a lot of people, the really soft, thick cushions that don't have a lot of contours to them can be comfortable. They can be really good for protecting skin, but it's harder to scoot forward and back on them to do transfers because they're not stable. There's not an easy place to put your hand to get a handhold. And then also the thicker, softer cushions tend to feel a little less stable when you're wheeling on uneven ground, especially if you have a very thick cushion. So sometimes people will pick foam or foam with gel or foam with air to get a little bit more stability and postural support, but each person's different. And then for skin protection, I guess one starting point would be to say, don't just get the cheapest foam cushion on the market or put egg crate on the top of your cushion or use a pillow. Usually an expensive cushion is the main thing that you need to start out expecting to get a higher end cushion most of the time to protect against pressure sores if you have any trouble with sensation or you're not especially mobile. And skin protection and cushions, each product touts having the best answer for the design and the materials to prevent pressure sores, but it really depends on your body type how mobile you are, how fragile your skin is, and even it doesn't necessarily matter what's worked for you in the past, because as everybody ages, their skin changes, their body types change, so sometimes you'll have to have different types of cushions over your lifetime. Thickness, like I said before, can vary anywhere from about 2 inches thick to around 4.5 inches thick. There are reasons related to skin and posture that you might need a thicker cushion, but thinner ones tend to let you sit lower between the wheels and make them easier to reach. And then weight. So part of the impact of weight is the materials you use and how thick the cushion is, but also on your size and how large your chair is. So several inch wide cushion and several inches deep is going to weigh a lot and add more to the total weight of your chair. But I think it also influences how easy it is to take the cushion on and off by yourself when you're getting in and out of your car. And then for dimensions, a lot of times you'll narrow down your cushion with all these other features that we just talked about, and then realize that you have a wheelchair width or seat depth that's a fixed size for your body type, and the cushions available that you really like that have met all these needs don't come in those sizes. So you have to stop for a minute and look at each product and the width and depth options and see if it's available in your size and if that's something you're able or willing to compromise on, or if you have to look into other products. For maintenance, no cushion is maintenance free. Typically a purely foam cushion has a little less maintenance because you don't have to smooth out the gel in the back or need the gel to keep it smooth, and you don't have to check the air pressure or add air. So if you have limited hand dexterity or it's hard to remember to check your cushion consistently, you might want a lower maintenance option as opposed to going with air or gel, but there's other reasons to pick those ones. For durability, most cushions don't do well when exposed to moisture, and some cushions compress more quickly than others. So I think that's another time that it's great to talk to other wheelchair users or look up people's comments online to see what cushions hold up, but also realize that most cushions are expected to need to be replaced more often than the rest of the wheelchair frame. So you may be following up in seating clinic just to get a cushion a lot sooner than you need to get a completely new wheelchair. For moisture, the rubber with air cushions are easy to wipe down and they don't tend to be damaged by moisture. So if you're in a humid area or if you have incontinence issues, sometimes you may want to steer clear of a foam cushion unless it easily and consistently wicks the moisture away from your skin to keep your skin dry. You can get incontinence covers, but one of the drawbacks to those is that if it works well and keeps the moisture out of the cushion, it's keeping the moisture against your skin, which can damage skin. And then lastly, if you're moving somewhere where it's really hot and humid or cold, sometimes that'll influence the materials that you select.
Okay, and the last part of the wheelchair that we're going to talk about is the footplate. So Elisa and I both primarily work with people who are new wheelchair users, and so we're both kind of biased towards one that's flexible and can be changed over time. So the one that's pictured here is called an adjustable angle footplate. That's what I order probably 90% of the time. There also is a fixed angle footplate, and that's something that would be welded in. So once it's there, you can't change the angle of the footplate. Ideally, you want your foot to sit flat on the footplate. That way the pressure is evenly distributed. So you don't want to just have your toes touch. You don't want to have your feet falling off the side and just the arch of your foot touching or just your heel touching, because any of those would place you at risk for getting some skin breakdown. One of the nice things with the adjustable angle footplate is that if you also have an orthopedic problem where you don't have very much range and very much flexibility in your knee or your ankle, you can do something that's not intended to be done, but you can flip it around. You can flip around the hardware just like it shows here, and you can move that footplate further away from the chair or how it's meant to be, which is tucked behind that frame. This is not a great long-term solution for people because when you have the footplate in front of the frame and you lean forward, you have a chance of shifting your weight over your feet and lifting up the rear wheels, especially when you're doing a transfer and you're lifting your butt out of the seat. The whole chair can spin out from under you, so be very, very careful of that. However, if you put your feet on the ground in front of it, then if you have spasticity and your legs pull back, you could cut up your ankles with it. So it's definitely like not the best solution, but it's there in a pinch if you need it. So when I've had a patient who has a broken lower leg bone and they don't have enough flexibility in their knee, but I think that they're going to get that, then I will often put them in an ultralight wheelchair to start, flip the hardware, let them get used to it, figure out what they need in a chair, and then as they gain motion in their knee, progressively move that footplate back where it's meant to be. And then another footplate option is the flip-up footplate. So this is fairly new on the market in the last maybe few years. It's not quite as durable as the adjustable angle footplate. It's designed for someone who is doing some walking and some wheelchair propulsion during their day. So someone who needs to stand up out of their chair. It flips up to allow you to get your feet on the ground underneath you to pull your feet back, so you don't have to have your feet in front of your footplate and then try and stand up. That's really far away. So usually to stand, you lean forward, you get your weight over your feet, and then you pop up. One thing I found when I first started ordering these is that you definitely have to specify the size of the footplate you want. You have to specify the width and the depth. If you don't, you may end up with something a lot smaller than you intended to do. So that was a fault that I had when I first started. Also know that because of where it's mounted on the wheelchair, it's intended to be closer to the seat, but it ends up tucking way further back than either a fixed footplate or an adjustable angle footplate. So it's something that you may want to try or double check that you have enough flexibility in your knee and ankle to have your feet sitting further back underneath you.
Okay, so now we're into tying some of this together with a few different scenarios. And the first one would relate to having a wheelchair that's not too tippy. And by tippy, I mean one that easily tips over backwards. One of the reasons that this might be, or one of the cases where this is applied, is that research has shown that we're supposed to mount the back wheels as far forward as possible so the wheels are easy to reach. But the more that you do that, the more the chair is tippy. So then we're in this struggle of wanting to have the wheels forward so that they can be reached, and then we move them back so the chair is not too tippy, and then we move them forward again. And so I think it's important to realize all the different factors that can cause the chair to be tippy when you're moving the wheels forward and back. I think this is especially true for users who have a spinal cord injury in their neck and have some weakness in their arms and are actually pulling the wheels forward as opposed to pushing them forward with a stronger arm. For those users, you especially need the wheels to be further forward so that it's easy to reach the upper back part of the wheel to pull it forward. And so to understand what makes a chair more or less tippy, we will take a moment. Well, actually, before I talk about what makes a chair tippy, here's Josh Hancock, and he joined us with help through the Nielsen grant to do a series of videos on manual wheelchair skills, which are available through our site. So using a wheelie intentionally, so tipping back intentionally, as you can see, lifts up those front wheels so that they can go over grass or gravel, or allow you to lift your wheels up over a pothole, go up a curb, go down a ramp in a wheelie. So you do want to be able to do that, especially if you have the skill and the balance, and not have a chair that's so stable that it's hard to lift up and balance. But you don't want the chair to be so unstable that as you're wheeling across flat surfaces, it's popping a wheelie accidentally, which can be stressful and tiresome because you're having to land a wheelie with every push. So feel free to check out his videos on our site. And yeah, so a wheelchair is a type of a teeter-totter. And with teeter-totters, there's that center point, the balance point, which is the fulcrum. There's the crossbar, and then there's a rider on each side, or weight on each side of the balance point. If you have a lot of weight on one side and not the other, it's going to tip. If you have the weight distributed, so each rider is sitting the same distance apart on the teeter-totter. As you remember from using teeter-totters, though, you can offset that by moving the riders closer or further away from that center point so that you can instead lower the teeter-totter yourself as the smaller rider. So you can turn it around. With a wheelchair, there is the same balance point, and that fulcrum or balance point on a wheelchair is the center of the back wheel, the axle. And the weight that is behind it is going to bias the chair towards tipping backwards easily. Three things I would like to highlight with that makes the chair more tippy. First of all would be, like Holly said before, if the backrest is tilted back so it's reclined, more of the rider and more of the wheelchair is oriented behind that balance point, and it's a little further back from that balance point. So even just adjusting the recline of the backrest a couple of degrees can make the chair a lot more tippy. Secondly, if you're putting weight on the back of the chair in the form of hanging a backpack that's filled with a lot of heavy things, the backpack on the back of the chair is going to make it more tippy. And so consider getting a pack where you can stow things underneath the seat in a sling or a pack that goes underneath the wheelchair to make the chair more stable, but still be able to bring your things with you. Oh, and then the last part is like I said, the back wheel could be mounted anywhere along the side of the wheelchair frame to make the chair more or less tippy. And that's because there's hardware underneath that allows the back wheel to slide forward or back along the frame. Even moving it 1/2 of an inch can greatly influence how tippy the chair is. And then the front of the chair also has an impact. So one of the parts of the chair that would make the chair more stable would be as if you ordered the longer frame. So if you have the option to add some extra tubing beyond the cushion to make the chair longer in the front, that weighs down the front of the chair. And again, if you have some weakness in your arms and you really need to get the wheels forward, that's something to consider doing so that you can move the wheels and have a stable chair. A second thing to consider would be the weight of your legs. We've had some people who've had bulky muscular legs and have lost some muscle mass or lost weight, and then their chair is more tippy because they don't have their legs weighing down the front of the chair. Or even people with amputations need to factor that lack of weight in the front and adjust other parts of the chair. Lastly, it's not just about what's in the front or the back of the chair, but it also is about what is on the top of the chair, because wheelchairs can be top heavy, which makes them more tippy. So one of the ways to counter being top heavy in the wheelchair is to consider a modified box frame where you're adding some tubing closer to the floor, which makes the chair more stable in the front. Weighs it down a little bit, so sometimes you can get away with moving the back wheels further forward as a result.
So we're seeing a trend of more and more people who are doing some walking and some wheelchair propulsion. So more and more incomplete injuries. I'm going to talk about a subset of people who are both using a wheelchair part of the day and walking part of the day, and that's people with Cauda Equina syndrome. Cauda Equina syndrome is something that you get when you injure your spinal cord at the very bottom. And so you injure some of the nerves before they exit the spinal cord and some of the nerves after they exit the spinal cord. What that does is that creates a unique set of symptoms. So let's get into how that affects your wheelchair. So people with Cauda Equina syndrome, because the injury is happening lower down in their back, they tend to end up with really persistent back pain. When you have back pain, it's often not comfortable to sit in a tucked position with your knees higher than your rear end. And so you may want to consider having a flatter slope for someone with Cauda Equina. However, you're going to have some conflicting needs, because another thing that happens with Cauda Equina syndrome is you end up with persistent weakness in your glutes or your butt muscles. And so instead of standing up normally, like I described before, where you lean forward, get your weight over your feet, and stand up, you instead kind of push your hips forward and push your weight over your feet. And so having some long arm rests that are tall to push from is helpful, though those are not designed to do that, so know that the hardware is not meant for that, although I haven't seen them break yet. So you want that, and then also it's going to be harder to stand from a lower surface than a taller surface. And so we talked earlier about the front seat to floor height, Elisa talked about that, and then about how the height of your cushion is going to affect how tall you're sitting on the chair. The taller you can get the front of the chair, the better for someone with Cauda Equina, because it's going to be easier to stand up. But they're often also using the wheelchair most of the time when they're out in the community and going longer distances, so you still want to be able to sit low enough in the chair, low enough between the wheels, so that you can effectively push the chair. So you can see if you want the front of the chair to be really high, the back of the chair to be really low, and you don't want a steep slope to the seat, you're going to have to give somewhere. And so that's where you're going to have a conversation between the wheelchair user and the therapist and the vendor to figure out what setup is best for you. I'm going to go back one more time. Another thing that happens with Cauda Equina is because of where it injures the nerves, you tend to have incontinence. And so like Elisa talked about earlier, If you're someone who has incontinence, you want to either have an incontinence cover that is going to protect your cushion from the incontinence, or have a cushion that's really easy to clean, so that the air cushions that are rubber tend to be easier to wipe down, and so that might be a good option. Cauda equina also tends to result in some numbness and pain in the butt, and so it's really sensitive, and so having a softer cushion can be helpful. And then this is an instance where the flip-up footplate is a great plan. You may want to consider having less taper in the wheelchair frame. So again, that's less of a narrow spot near the feet, because another thing that happens is you tend to have persistent weakness in your ankles. And so folks with Cauda equina are often wearing bracing on one or both ankles. So you want to make sure that you fit in your wheelchair with that bracing on. And then because when you wear braces on your ankles, it tends to keep your ankle at more of a 90-degree angle, tucking your feet back might be really challenging, and your feet might not fit flat on the footrest. And the flip-up footplate is going to pull that footrest back towards the seat. So you may consider adding some length to the frame so that you're not tucked back quite as tightly. Sometimes standing up from a wheelchair can be challenging, whether you have the flip-up footplate or not, just being able to get your weight over your feet. So for some people, I've gotten around this by having them scoot to the front of the chair and then sort of sit sideways on the chair and straddle the caster, so you can more easily get your weight over your feet. So just an option. And then the last thing we're going to talk about is winter conditions. And I've really learned a lot about winter conditions this year when I had a patient from Alaska who was leaving the hospital as a new wheelchair user in the middle of winter and needed his wheelchair set up to be able to handle that. And at the same time, I had one of my past patients asking how they would modify their chair because they wanted to get to the ski slopes and do some adaptive skiing. And so I looked into this a lot, and I reached out to Jill Erickson, who is a physical therapist in Soldotna, Alaska, who herself has paraplegia, and asked her some questions. I looked into research, and so I wanted to share what I found. So there's some research in Manitoba, Canada, that has looked into the barriers of using a wheelchair in snow. And they polled 99 manual wheelchair users. This is what they found. Over 90% of them identified the following difficulties. 1, the tires and the casters became stuck in the snow. 2, they were slipping on the ice. 3, they found that it was hard to go up and down ramps. Their hands got really cold while gripping the rims, and it was hard to find accessible sidewalks and roads. 80% of them reported that they needed extra help when leaving the house. One manual wheelchair user in that article was quoted as saying, "The amount of snow, so the amount of snow on the sidewalk, that may be easily stepped over might as well be the Great Wall of China to someone with mobility limitations," which makes sense. If you think of it with cold climates, it gets slushy, it refreezes, those casters are going to get stuck in everything, your wheels are going to slide. So let's talk about how to adjust the chair. So first of all, when it comes to cold climates, there's a case study out there that looked at someone who was using a gel cushion and ended up getting frostbite on their butt because the temperature of the gel dropped. So you may want to consider not using a fluid-filled or gel cushion if you're someone in a cold climate. Also, you want to make sure that your hands are protected. So I've had some past patients who have gone to live in Alaska who chose to have coated push rims so that it insulated the rims from their hand. That may or may not be the best option for everybody. Whether or not you have coating on your rim, you are probably going to want to wear some gloves to protect your hands from frostbite. And then your lower legs rest really close to that frame. Sometimes they rest on the frame. If that's you, you may want to either wear thick enough pants in the winter so that you're protecting yourself, or consider getting some impact guards that are going to insulate the frame. Secondly, with snow tires. So we put snow tires on cars. It makes sense that we would have a different kind of tire for optimizing a wheelchair for snow. The jury's kind of out on what the best tire is. Some people will say it's a large knobby tire like this. Know that if you plan to use that for both indoor and outdoor use, it's going to get caked in snow and you're going to drag all of that wetness throughout your house. So you will probably want a mudroom to knock that off. Or some people will switch their tires, although there's pros and cons to that. In the biking industry and also with wheelchair users on the snow, some people will say that a taller tire with high pressure actually handles better in the snow. So really the jury's still out. Some people will make or buy wheelchair chains like the ones on the left here. It seems like if you're going to be outside for a long time, that might be useful. If you're just going from your house to the car, maybe not the best use of your time. And then the casters. The casters are going to sink into the snow if it's deep, or they're going to get stuck in every single one of those, or thrown about with the ice on the sidewalk. So having a wider caster is going to roll over things easier. And then there are little skis that you can get for the casters. So when I reached out to the physical therapist in Alaska, I asked her about these specifically, and she said, I've never heard of them. And I got an email back a few weeks later that said, these are great. There's one vote of confidence for them. The other option would be to lift your casters, to just not even deal with them, get them off the ground. So whether that's doing a wheelie while you're out in the snow or adding something to your chair that lifts those casters up. This is one example. There are some examples. There are some products out there that have motors attached to them. There are some that just lift the casters purely. This one is going to attach to the front frame, and so that's a larger wheel, maybe 6 or 8 inches. Not 8 inches. How tall do you think it is? 8 inches? That's going to attach to the frame and lift up the wheels. So it's designed for any uneven terrain, but it certainly works in the snow. And then sometimes no matter what you do to your ultralight wheelchair, it's just not going to be the best option for the snow, so you may consider getting an all-terrain wheelchair to access the snow.
Okay, so what's next from here? I think what's next is build a long-term lasting relationship with a wheelchair seating clinic or a wheelchair seating therapist, a PT or OT who specializes in this. They can help with picking the first wheelchair and having you try out things for that chair, but that doesn't mean go ahead and just keep ordering that the rest of your life or just depend only on a wheelchair rep or manufacturer. Instead, consider having check-ins, whether that's once a year or as your needs or abilities change and your body changes over time. They can help you with seeing products that are out there and being more specific than we've been tonight with saying things that are available for trial and some pros and cons of those and what they've heard from other users and wheelchair reps. And also they can act as a liaison. They can act as a liaison between you and your insurance company with trying to get things paid for or replaced. And they can also act as a liaison between you and the vendor with, again, trying out different products and doing the ordering process with the vendor. I wanted to thank Chris Garbaccio. I've learned so much from him the last several years, and he's a part of the Model Systems. He's a research coordinator, and he also coordinates the Peer Mentor Program. And both Holly and I have learned almost everything about wheelchair setup from Josh Golden, who's here tonight. Jill Erickson is a physical therapist up in Soldotna, Alaska, and she has paraplegia. She's a physical therapist, and Holly talked to her about setting up a wheelchair in snow. Ben LaCourse is a rehab volunteer who helped a lot with the photography for this presentation with Holly, and then Joshua Hancock is a manual wheelchair user who helped with doing filming related to wheelchair skills and giving us tips on setting up a wheelchair for snow as well. So from here, we just wanted to open up for feedback. If you think of things later that you wish we would have focused on or things that you wish we would have considered, we have our email address on here so that you can give feedback and keep this conversation going over time. But we just wanted to open it up from here for questions and comments.
All right. Thank you guys so much. So what questions do people have?
The question was, how do I get to the water and how do I get across the sand? And I've seen a lot of options online that do have huge soft tires or wheels, but I don't know which of them would be better than others and which beaches that they're available at. Does anybody in the audience have personal experience with that they wanted to share? If not, there's definitely resources through your recreational therapy has a lot of info on that. So the comment was follow up with the public park system, and okay, and they can help you with finding resources specific to your region or to your beach. Are there any other questions or comments? It doesn't have to be related to beaches. So the question was, when is it worth paying for upgrades, including upgrades related to the type of materials used, such as standard types of metal versus, or like aluminum versus titanium or carbon fiber, and are they actually different in durability or weight or performance? I have had the same experience where I got a chair that had several titanium parts and the chair weighed a ton, and I had ordered all those parts to make it lighter because somebody didn't have strong enough arms to manage. For that, I think when you're looking at the total weight of the wheelchair, you're wanting to go towards the lighter and not adding so many components that the chair is so difficult to load in and out of the car and to push on uneven terrain. But the user's weight has quite an impact on the total weight when you're propelling the chair. That doesn't impact how hard it is to load it in and out of a vehicle. But no, each person's body type does have an impact on this. And sometimes if you do have really sore shoulders or a lot of weakness, or it's difficult to push on uneven terrain, it may be worth paying extra to get the components that weigh less and keep shaving off ounces for those people more than others. As far as the specific products, I keep going back to asking past patients what they've liked and asking people at forums or the Consumer Advisory Board or looking on online forums like Rutgers has Care Cure, and there's other groups out there, and seeing what people say about what's breaking and what they like about the products. I don't know if you have more to add on it.
I think it would just, part of it would be how much does it enhance the performance of the chair also. So if it's making a really big difference performance-wise, it might be worth it. If it's just a few ounces and it's not enhancing the performance, then maybe not worth the cost.
Did you have additional things you wanted to highlight? Okay.
So the question was whether we could talk about camber. So camber is the angle that you mount the rear wheels, and so standard I think is 0 to 2 degrees of camber, so not very much. On like an athletic chair, like a sports chair, you might have a lot of camber, so you might mount the wheels like this. It's going to make it, when you have more camber, it's going to make it easier to turn really quickly without feeling unstable. It's going to make it harder to get through doors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What else would you
Yeah,
like to
so
add?
if you're doing it 15 degrees of camber on a sports chair, the chair is incredibly wide, but it does tuck the wheels closer to your body so they're easier to reach. It's really easy to maneuver. So it seems like most of the time, if we have a really wide chair to start out with, sometimes we're doing 0 degrees of camber to make the chair as narrow as possible. But if space is not a problem and the user has a pretty narrow chair in the first place, then we're often doing 2, 3, or 4 degrees of camber. The question was, how do you actually trial parts and where does that happen? Well, in some ways on inpatient rehab, we have a luxury of having a lot of different demo equipment to try with people, and they don't get to use it as much in their actual home because they're still in the hospital and they're not going to work or going out in the community as much to really give it a thorough test. But we do have the time and the skill to help pick between options, set it up for them, have them try it, and we're not then lending it and losing it out to the unknown community where it's hard to get it back and trial it with other people. But we don't have every single product that's available. We're hearing things at conferences and from wheelchair reps and from users, and we don't necessarily have space to store all of it and have the skill set to know how to adjust all of it. Some products we run into trouble where they're not getting paid for very often, so we want to show everything but not take up all of our space and time with things that we can't order that often. I think it's harder when people are in an outpatient clinic to really heavily trial equipment but not take all their stock and sometimes have it be gone for weeks to months. But seating clinic should have some of the main products available, and even some of like the wheelchair attachments that we were talking about earlier. And I think a lot of times wheelchair reps or vendors are not always excited to just give the product to the user directly. They often will want to have a wheelchair seating therapist in the mix before having the user just try it out and borrow it for a while.
So it's often a collaboration between the vendor and the wheelchair seating clinic and the user to make sure that you have the product available that you can trial. It might be a good question to ask when you're picking a seating clinic. Am I going to be able to try this product if you have a certain product that you're interested in trying?
And I think one of the difficulties with the inventions is sometimes the way that they're coded, so how insurance looks at them, makes it difficult to get insurance to pay for them. Or sometimes we're nervous if somebody has a finite amount of money and this is their only chair and their only components, to take a gamble and get something new and innovative that sounds great when we're at an in-service or a conference or had one user who liked it, because we don't want to lock somebody into a product that turns out to have poor customer service, or it's not very durable, or it had some drawbacks and we didn't get to trial it that much. So we're always trying to balance what to use and to try out ourselves and have users test it out and order it for them and then hear their feedback later, as opposed to using something that's kind of more tried and true and we have a lot of experience with it.
All right, I bet these guys are willing to hang out for another 10 or 15 minutes, so